Welcome to the Spectrum Connection, a podcast hosted by Jess
and Alyce. As two mums of neurodivergent kids, we are here to share our experiences, insights, and advice with other parents navigating this unique journey.
Join us as we discuss everything from daily challenges to breakthrough moments, all with a focus on understanding and celebrating neurodivergence. Episode 2. I'm excited. We are going to
be what's this topic? We're doing early days today, aren't we?
We are. We're going to be talking about the early days. I think this one was a most asked about. We put up a poll and you guys all voted for the early days to be one of the first topics we talk about. So I'm excited. It's a big one.
It is a big one. It is a big one. So I think we'll get straight into it. First off, reminder for self-care. If you haven't done anything for yourself today or the last week, month, whatever it is you're listening to this, grab a cup of coffee or go for a walk or do a boring chore while you listen to this.
Hopefully we can make that chore much more enjoyable when you're listening to us.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about the early days, and I thought maybe we could go into just a little bit. We don't have to too much on that, but just a little bit of our experiences on the early days. I will speak first, I guess. The early days were a roller coaster, I will say. And I think it's a very impactful time on our lives. Like, I think it's a very, the early days were a pivotal point in our lives, I think. And I will say it really did have a big impact on us when our son was diagnosed as autistic. I always kind of knew he was autistic, and I had a lot of people telling me, oh, he's just a boy. Boys are slower to develop than girls. And so I had a lot of that external opinions being weighed in on me. And I still knew throughout that whole period, I was like, I still think that he's autistic, especially having, I have had that lived experience and I know about autism and I knew how it presented. I kind of knew Jacob was always autistic, and it really started off with like that speech delay really was the starting point of us seeing a pediatrician. But yeah, that first year, I think, was the most roller coaster of emotions, I think. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, in that you've got a lot of people speaking to you, you've got a lot of people advising you of things, and you've got a lot of things to do in like forms, funding, therapies, interventions. You've got all these things that you have to do. And I think that kind of puts a lot of pressure on a lot of parents, and that it did for me as well. So we'll be speaking about that a little bit later, but did you want to give a little, how was your early days?
Yeah, I was just going to ask how old Jacob was when you guys went through that.
Yeah, he was 2.5 when he was diagnosed. However, we went to go see the pediatrician at 18 months old.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if you want me to go into that, but the pediatrician was very, he's not autistic. We went in at 18 months. He said that we went in for the speech delay. So said he's not speaking as much as typical children are. And he lost words, actually. He went through a regression and lost the few words that he was saying. So obviously we went to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician said that we weren't, and I quote, we weren't holding items back from Jacob enough for him to speak. So essentially, hold an item up and don't give it to him until he says the word.
Lovely. Just like I've also heard other people say, like, they've been told, like especially if they've got other siblings or something, like, oh, you're doing all the talking for him or her instead of letting them speak. Like,
Blame on the
anyway, I've heard that
parents.
one. Yeah. Our experience was completely different to that.
Awesome.
In the sense, so I spoke last episode, I've got an early childhood background. It's in early childhood for a fair while. Kind of thought that I knew what autism was because we had some autistic children in, I was educating for a while, but those children presented a lot differently to my own children. And it's kind of that stereotypical presentation, I guess, that people normally think, non-speaking and high support needs, I guess.
Mm.
And so, yeah, my eldest, we had a few challenges with him as he got older, but he was ahead of speech for his age. We actually took him to a speech pathologist because he had some, I think he was 2 at that time, and he was still having a lot of saliva that he couldn't keep control of. So we took him to a speech therapist to address that, and he had assessments, and it was told, like, we were told that he's ahead in speech for his age. So we had no concerns there. Just had concerns with certain behaviors, really. A lot of the like repetitive type things and sensory things looking back. But I reached out to like early intervention. I was just thinking ADHD at this point, which I was right about, but I didn't know, like I didn't think about the autism, or didn't even cross my mind. And so yeah, we started reaching out to early intervention back then, and I've got another quote that I can give from I know it's one of them things, those moments you never forget, and it just lives, like it just sticks in you. I took him to early intervention. I think he was 2.5, 3. And I was explaining my concerns, and the lovely lady from I use that term loosely. Lovely lady at the early intervention said to me, "Oh, you're probably fine. There's nothing wrong with him. It's just your parenting."
No.
Yeah. So it was one of them shocked, like, "Oh, okay." And then I walked away, and she was giving me parenting, like, oh, we've got this parenting course coming up soon that you might benefit from type thing. And I was like, oh yeah, put me down. And I walked away thinking a couple of things. Firstly, I'm not here because I feel like there's something wrong with my child. I'm here because I feel like, he's having some challenges and I want to know how I can support him better. And then two, obviously, first time mum, I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong? And maybe it is my parenting. And at that time I was like signing up for all the parenting things. Like I just want to help him. I just want to support him. So if it's me, fix me, give me what I need. And I'd already had my second child by then. There's 20 months between them. And for his early days, his was just sense related with food. Like he didn't eat any fruit or veg, very minimal meat. And I took him to the pediatrician for that. But again, didn't think autism. I kind of, Google searched and sensory processing, and I thought, oh, that must be what it is, sensory processing disorder of some sort. But yeah, autism never crossed my mind. I started like researching, and, autism would pop up, but I always got stuck on the whole social thing. And when I reached out to professionals, I got told that, oh, he's too social to be autistic, or to have autism was the terms used. Yeah, and then it wasn't until Richie, so my eldest, was in year 1 at this stage. So kindergarten was a really big challenge. Still though, thinking it's just ADHD. And we actually got him an ADHD diagnosis, started medication, those type of things. And it really, like, challenges calmed right down. But it wasn't until year 1, change of classroom, another baby in the family, everything blew up again. And I think it was the school counselor that said to me, have you thought about exploring autism? And I was like, no, I've been told. And she was like, no, I think that's what. And I'd gone when I went to the pediatrician for the ADHD diagnosis, I went with a full list of my concerns and I gave them to the pediatrician, and she was lovely, and she's still our pediatrician now, but she actually didn't say anything about autism to me in that appointment. It wasn't until the next follow-up appointment, and I explained to her the challenges that we were having that reoccurred, and then she said to me, do you think that maybe we should explore autism? And so I'm grateful that she finally said that. But that was a good 6 months, I think, between the ADHD diagnosis and the even bringing up autism. And I kind of felt like, oh, wish you'd said this to me 6 months ago, because I would have already, wait lists are long and
Yeah.
all of that. But yeah, eldest was diagnosed in year one, and then second child was formally diagnosed in kindergarten, um, a year or so after that. And then my now 5-year-old was only diagnosed last year formally. But even with him, I was like, oh, I think he's autistic, but not quite sure. Like in the
Yeah.
back, even though then I'd already done uni at this point. I already have degrees, but I don't know. I think it's just society and conditioning and
Yeah. I think you kind of get into that headspace of like, and I guess I talk about it a lot, is that like, am I overthinking it? Am I just seeing it? Like, am I just like, I don't know. I think of the same thing with my second child, is like, am I just pushing these things or these ideas on, like, and picking up different little things? And you really do overthink it as a parent, especially when you're met with things that we've been met with about our parenting. And like, is it
yeah,
just me? Is it just what I'm doing? And like, it goes all the way back to what they used to call them, refrigerator mums. Have you ever heard of that term?
yeah. It's all
Um,
our fault
like
back in the day.
literally.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's where they thought autism come from. In case anyone's listening that don't know, that was one of the theories, was that parents were cold to their children, or mothers in particular, and that's why they were like
Imagine
that.
being told that. That's
I
what
know.
like.
Could you imagine back then? I mean, that's where all this comes from, but
Mm.
yeah, I couldn't imagine raising a child back then. That
Yeah,
knew
and I think
horrible for them poor mums.
yeah, and I think the whole historical like input of that coming into like pediatricians nowadays, I think it's still present. I think
Yeah,
the way that pediatricians are educated, I mean, I don't know for sure, but like I, from experience and from hearing a lot of people in our community talk about pediatricians, like you're met with so many comments that are very judgmental, very unhelpful. Um, and I think back to our experience with the pediatrician, like he sent us away for 6 months to wait and see and to hold things back from Jacob. Um, and then still at the second appointment when he was 2 years old, we said, I think he's autistic. And he said he's not autistic. Meanwhile, he is literally trashing this pediatrician's office, um,
yeah,
screaming and banging on the door. And I was just like, are you not seeing what I'm seeing? And I just think that maybe the professionals are a little bit hesitant, and a little bit scared to diagnose too early. However, we know earlier on it's better to know, and
yeah,
to yeah, just understand how their brains work earlier on. We ended up going to someone else because we were just not happy and got a
yeah,
level 3 diagnosis. So um, our our thinkings were right, but I think a lot of parents get in that position and they go, "Oh, okay, maybe it is me. Maybe I shouldn't be pushing this." And then it's not
yeah,
until later on in life when they start, there's some really big challenges happening and they've lost that early intervention because of something that a professional has said. And I think we were going to delve into that was um, like the feelings and emotions, what we wish we would have known back then that we know
yeah.
now.
Just on that point that you said about the early intervention thing, that was something that we actually experienced with my eldest, because back then, a fair few years ago now, early intervention with NDIS was 7. The
Hmm.
cutoff was 7, and obviously ADHD doesn't come under that. And we were having a lot of challenges still with ADHD diagnosis and medications, and we were using early intervention funding, but I knew that if we didn't, get that diagnosis before he was 7, that funding would have been cut. And so it was like it sounds really bad. This is where the systems fail us, because I was push, push, push for this diagnosis to, rule it out or rule it in that he was autistic, because I didn't want to have to get out of the, fall from the funding and then be left with nothing to support him with. And so, yeah, scraping all the money together and trying, I remember just calling all the people on the list and everyone in that area and, just trying to find somebody to get in before he was 7. Thankfully, they've increased that age now. But yeah, there's those little things that you forget that you go through when you like reflect, because it's just, I think a lot of people, like parents, relate is just the next step. Like, what's next? What's next? What's next? You don't have
It's
time
a
to really step
whirlwind.
back and think. Yes.
It's a
Yeah.
whirlwind, and a lot of people I'm speaking to now are just processing those emotions because they didn't allow themselves to back then, because we have to fight, we have to advocate, we have to push. And from a lot of stories, parents are having to push and push and push and push just to get the absolute bare necessities, like the support that they need and deserve. We're pushing and pushing for. And I will just say, for anyone that doesn't know about NDIS, is before the age has changed. So before 9 years old, you do not need a diagnosis to get NDIS funding. This is something huge, like
Yeah. And it's
mind-boggling.
not advertised
No,
anywhere, unless you know, or you know of someone who knows. Amount of parents, once I like started the journey and I was, friends and family that, were having struggles with their child, I'm like, NDIS right now.
yeah,
Get
get
in
on
contact with
it.
someone. Those early childhood partners, they do the assessments with you, like,
Mhm.
and that doesn't cost. So
You don't have to do it alone. And I think a lot of people I speak to are like privately paying for therapists, and I'm like, why aren't you on the NDIS? And they'll say, I didn't know I could. And so
good.
it's really just, that's probably like a big thing I would push out to the world, is like you can get on it. And the age now is under 9, so it's even bigger now.
And I
Um,
mean, especially in this climate we're in, a lot of people, struggling to put food on the table, let alone do therapies. And those children, and then families as a general shouldn't be struggling in that respect and thinking, oh, I can't afford to do that and reach out to, these places to get the support because we don't have the funds.
yeah.
That's what it's there for. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I think a big thing I would go back and like what I wish I would tell myself back then. I think there's two things, is one, feel the feelings. Don't push them away. Feel the feelings, because you're gonna have to process them sometime. Number
Yeah.
two would be, there is no rush to get into everything.
Yeah.
I think a big mistake a lot of parents get into is going, I need to get my child into speech therapy, OT, psychology, all of these different things. And whilst, early intervention is important, I have seen like therapy burnout from for our family. And I just would advise, I would advise myself, just take it a day at a time. You can just try one thing at a time. It's overwhelming to do all the different therapies in one go. So yeah.
Yeah. I vouch for that
Yeah.
advice too. I was that parent, was that early days. I mean, we, in the early days and you're struggling and you people don't go looking for diagnosis unless there's challenges. Like if everything's fine and you're happy and everything's going well, you're not reaching out to people to try and find answers. So when you finally get that diagnosis, you're in the thick of those challenges. That's where it comes from. So I think it's like, well, for myself anyway, it was like, okay, you've got this diagnosis now, what? And diagnosis is based on medical models, so of disability, so it's all doom and gloom. You get told all the negatives about your child, you get told all the challenges they have and what they need. Well, some therapists give you some steps on what they need next, some don't. but yeah, you get kind of told the list of interventions and what they're used for. And I got like the diagnosis, and then I sat down with like pen and paper and was like, okay, we need OT, we need speech with, and I was like going through the list, ringing around all the places with the earliest wait lists and putting our names down, and people weren't getting back to me. I was emailing like I was really annoying to these people probably because I was like, I've got to get him into all the things right now.
Yeah.
And I had
And
a young baby. I had another child and I had a young baby at that stage. And I was pulling him out of school. I was still working. Um, when he had the ADHD diagnosis and we started therapies, I was working and taking time off work to pull him out of school, to take him to therapy, to, heavily pregnant and rushing back to work and doing all the things because I felt like I need to get him this support so that he could cope at school and he can,
mm,
to kind of help our whole family. And then the like the autism diagnosis, I was even more on a like, we need to do more, we need to do more. And you know, just taking in a young baby and feeling burnt out myself, but thinking, oh, like I have to do this because, what's he like, I'm going to fail him, got that fear like I'm going to fail him and he's not going to be successful and he's not going to have, the things like other kids have or, whatever, if
yeah,
I don't do these things. But looking back on it, I wish I could just, like you said, strip it right back, focus on, little challenges, not doing all the things. Like we were doing speech, OT, psychology. Like he didn't need speech. He was ahead in speech, but I was told like, oh, you need a speech pathologist. So I was like, okay, I need a speech pathologist.
I
And then
literally,
we'd get there and they go, what is your goals? And I'm like, I don't know, you tell me. What should we be working on? My
yeah,
poor
I was
child.
told to do this. Yeah, no, I think they copy and paste that recommendation list and put it on those diagnostic papers. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people are handed those papers and sent off on their way, like no help whatsoever unless you pay for
No.
it. So I think a lot of people see that as their only guidance. They get a report and then they get recommendations. So they see that as word, like you need to do this. And I saw it as word. I was like, oh, well, this is what we have to do if we want him
Yeah.
to, if we want him to communicate, if we want him to like live his best life, we need to do this now. And I was very sleep deprived. I had a newborn when Jacob was diagnosed. And so two kids that didn't sleep well. And so I threw myself in and it had some really, really dark days because of it. And I really wish that I would have just pulled back and just taken it one step at a time. There is no rush, there's no race against time. Obviously, we know they want to get some sort of intervention earlier, but there's no rush. And if it's going to
And I
affect their
think that's
health,
comforting for people.
yeah,
Like there is a lot of wait lists. We're
yeah,
hearing more and more and more. And so like if you're in that stage, those early days and you're on all the wait lists and I could imagine this internal fear like we're not getting any early intervention and what's going to happen.
yeah,
I think it's okay. It's more than okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Some of the biggest breakthroughs we've had has got nothing to do with therapy. And therapists, like there's so many wonderful therapists out there, and there's a need, and yeah, but it doesn't all come from therapy, I think is
yeah. And I
yeah,
think that's another like thing I would say to myself back then is that that is not everything that you should not be directing your life and your family's life into therapies. Like it shouldn't be the whole, like that shouldn't be the whole thing of your family. Like
yeah,
live your life, enjoy life. The child that walked into that diagnostic assessment is the same child that walked out of that assessment. And you know, I think a lot of people say, okay, we're doing this, we're on the autism train. I don't know what else you call it. We're
yeah,
doing
yeah,
all these things. And I think you lose track of like, oh, we're just a family wanting to live life. Like we should just
yeah.
enjoy it. And
And I think it does come down to that, like I said, the medical model of disability. When you get that diagnosis, it's all doom and gloom, all challenges, no strengths in there.
Yeah.
And it does it unless they're really neuroaffirming, which I find that some therapists and assessments, like, we're trying to get there, but it's slow going. But yeah, you kind of walk out there with that feeling like there's something wrong with my child. But when you educate yourself, when you find out more about neurodiversity, when you find out more about what autism is, how it presents for your child, you look at it in a completely different light. Like, I look at autism now completely different to what I did at the start,
Mhm.
and I just embrace it. Like, it's just, there's nothing wrong with being autistic at all. At all. There's challenges, of course, like anything. But yeah, when you just embrace and have that as part of your family, and that's, that your family doesn't have to look a certain way, or your child doesn't have to behave a certain way. Like, we can just embrace who we are for, and who our family is for who they are, instead of trying to change to fit into the society mold. I think that's, yeah.
I think
And
for
that's a whole another episode we could do right
yeah, I was
there.
gonna
That's like,
say a few years, like into after Jacob's diagnosis, we did try and stay like keep up with the Joneses, I guess. We did try that and it just did not work. And it wasn't only when we started embracing, accepting that we were going to live a different life. Um, doesn't mean it wasn't a good life. It's an amazing life. It wasn't until then that like my son was happy. Like I saw happiness and we weren't trying to go to every single event and we weren't trying to, do 10 therapies a week. It wasn't 10, but stuff like
yeah, but
that.
and it's not just the child's capacity either, it's ours.
Yeah.
There's so much research out there about our nervous systems, like,
Mhm.
in relation and co-regulation with our children. If we're burnt out, if we're stressed, if we're not coping, we can't expect our children to cope as well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
They
it
pick, they
comes,
pick up on everything. And I know that like as soon as I'm stressed, I see that stress in like my kids and I'm like, hold on, take a deep breath, let's calm down. As soon as I calm down, like they start to calm down. So they're very big and sensitive on those, like
those,
picking up
yeah,
the emotions. Well, would we like to go into the questions that we had for
yeah,
this topic? Um, First question was what professionals are involved and what supports are offered. So this can be a big answer.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I guess the first, like for diagnosis, you either go to a pediatrician, clinical psychologist,
yeah.
um, and they're your options. I believe that's all of them.
Yeah, so multidisciplinary approach in Australia, more than just one. So you can go with a pediatrician and allied health professional and come together for diagnosis. There's yeah, but I think I in the whole professional thing, that to know that not every professional has knowledge on autism. I think that's something that I didn't really know either. You think that all teachers know about autism and all psychologists know about autism and all pediatricians, they don't. They get the basic knowledge, and then if they want to know more about autism, they've got to go and do extra.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, finding therapists that actually know autism would be my first point of call, not just go to anybody, because you may get the answers like we did about not being autistic and then having to find out later on. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think earlier on, because you're so vulnerable, you're in
yeah,
a new world, really. I think parents can often take what specialists say by word and like,
yes,
go, okay, they're the specialists. They know what they're talking about. And they don't always know what they're talking about.
no,
Um, and
unfortunately
so
not.
I think when you're in
Second
that
opinions,
vulnerable
second
spot,
opinions.
yeah, when you're in that
Yeah,
vulnerable spot, you often believe what they say. And it's not until you sort of reflect and go, hold on, yeah, let's just go on to the next person, get a second opinion. Said.
yeah,
Um, Next question was what NDIS advice would you give to yourself if you could go back? Kind of covered.
yeah, kind of covered that.
Yeah, we'll go on to the
Do
next
all
one.
the things.
Did your diagnosis change your mind on having more children? I'm currently going through this at the moment.
Okay. So, like, not sure if that meant diagnosis of children or diagnosis for yourself. Um, I mean, I have 4 children, all neurodivergent. So, I mean, I was already on my third child before we discovered autism. Um, I I don't think it would affect, like, if I knew, I don't think it would. I
Yeah.
don't know, it's a really hard question. I think because
Yeah.
everyone's capacity is different. I don't
Mhm.
know. I think I've read like 4 children is my capacity. I think that's it for
Yeah.
me. Um,
I'm at that
but
capacity too.
yeah, yeah, you're at capacity too. Everyone's different in that respect. But yeah, a challenge, I think just, I mean, autism is genetic, so you do have to think about that. There is a high possibility that your next child will be autistic. And I think it just, you have to question yourself what capacity you have
Yeah.
to give to another child. But I wouldn't, personally, I wouldn't keep, like, I don't have a fear of having autistic children. Does that make sense? So I
Mhm.
don't think it would ever have held me back from having more because I wanted more children because yeah, I don't know. I I'm kind of
Yeah.
at the stage that autism's pretty cool when you get your head around it.
Yeah. I think a lot of people ask me that question. Did you choose to have Jazz, my second child, after diagnosis? And we didn't. We fell pregnant and had Jazz before Jacob was diagnosed autistic. So I think it's like it's that whole like I don't know what I would have thought, if that makes any
Well,
sense. Like
yeah,
I didn't go through that. I didn't find out Jacob was autistic before having or deciding to have Jazz. So I don't have that input. I will say though that they have a incredible bond most of the time. They're
yeah.
siblings, they're gonna
Like
fight. Um,
it's natural for kids to fight. That's part of development, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, like they have their hard times, but they like I share so many really beautiful moments and moments of my daughter Jazz just taking Jacob out of his comfort zone sometimes.
Yeah.
And that could be another thing that we go into is just sort of like maybe sibling relationships, really, because as soon as Jazz was born, she was this sensory nightmare that came into our house, and Jacob was
Yeah.
not happy. But as she's grown up and become less of a sensory, I say that in the best way possible. She cried, she
Yeah,
was
yeah.
spontaneous, she was loud, and just, unpredictable. Babies are
Yeah.
unpredictable. And I think
Babies are.
they're not like our kids, or I'll say my son didn't respond well to that because he doesn't like loud noises. He doesn't like spontaneity. He doesn't like anyone touching him. So it was just sensory overload for him. So I think as the years have gone on, she's just learned how to approach him and they
Yeah.
just have the best relationship now. So yeah, I think if I had the diagnosis beforehand, I would still go ahead and have a second child. But I truly can't really speak on that because I didn't know. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think like having 4 children, when you like you're in the thick of it, say, 2 children, 3 children, and then you're pregnant, you're thinking how, like, especially in the challenging days, how am I going to add a baby to this?
yeah,
But it just does, like, it just happens. It just works. You have hard days. Like, I don't find any different from having 1 to 4, honestly, because the challenges are different.
yeah,
But every time you have a baby, it's challenging
yeah,
because you're navigating new things. You're a first time mum. It's challenging because you don't know what you're doing and you don't think. And then the second child you have, they're completely different to the first one. So then you're doing it all over again. So there's just, I don't know, challenges are just different, I think,
Mm. I think
regardless of the diagnosis. Yeah.
I think what was the deciding factor of whether I would have a third child was never really like it just felt like we were done with two. We were happy with
Yeah.
our two.
Yeah.
But
And someone's always told me to, or I always got told that when you're done. So
yeah,
if you're like questioning, oh, I don't know if we want another one, you're probably not done.
yeah,
I got that feeling after my fourth was like,
yeah.
yeah, I'm done. I'm done. And my sister no longer had a baby, and I was like, oh, and I love cuddling her, but I really love giving her back too. So that tells me that I'm definitely done.
Yes. Yeah. You see
Yeah.
babies and you're like, oh, I could do with a third. And then I'm like, I just feel done. And pregnancy was not kind to me. So I just
Yeah.
don't want to go through that again. Not like the whole, I think having a newborn would be an experience with my family at the moment. But
Come on, Jess, you're awake all night anyway. What's the difference?
that would be chaos. That's what
You're
people
already sleep
say.
deprived. Come on.
No,
No,
I'm
no.
shops closed.
When you're done, you're done. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was a really cool topic that we could talk about, but obviously there's so many things that we could like stem out from that. So if there's any like topic ideas that anyone has and wants to.
Yeah, or something that we touched on that you want us to delve a little bit deeper in.
Mhm.
Because yeah, I think that was just like scratching the surface really of early days, because the
Yeah.
more you reflect on it, the more you remember, oh, I remember this part and I remember that part. For
Yeah.
me anyway, and because I have so many like children, the journey was different for each of them. So I've got so much that I could say, but we'll leave that for another day.
We could speak for hours and hours.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So thanks for joining everyone. I hope you guys, what's the show notes? We'll put all our
Show notes. Yeah,
details.
we'll put something in the show notes, and
Yeah.
yeah, something.
Yeah.
Find us on Instagram.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.